Hi everyone, I'm Rob Shapland and welcome to this tutorial on using Hashcat to crack passwords. This goes along with an accompanying article and I strongly recommend you read that before watching the video. Now, Hashcat's an incredibly powerful tool for cracking passwords, and what I mean by that is taking the hashes of a password and converting it to the plain text format. So for example, as a red teamer, if you were able to compromise a domain controller on a network and get access to the SAM file that stores all the password hashes, you can then take those, input them into Hashcat, use a dictionary to then compare the values together, hash the values in the dictionary, and then compare the two hashes and see if they match. You can then use that to work out the plain text value, and Hashcat can do all that for you. So in this tutorial, I'll show you an example of how to use Hashcat for a simple password and how to use it to crack a more complex password as well. So for the purposes of this video, I'm assuming that you've installed Hashcat already, and I've opened up Command Prompt and I've navigated to the folder where Hashcat is stored. So the first thing I want to do is just quickly show you the help file, because it's going to show you just how many options there are for the different types of hashes that it can crack. So if I scroll up, if we look at this section here, everything in this is different types of hash it's capable of cracking with an associated number next to it. Now, this number is really useful because you're going to want to know what type of hash you are using, and then you're going to specify the type of hash that you're trying to crack in there. Now, for the purpose of this tutorial, I'm going to be using a NTLM hash, which is the kind of standard Windows hash that it uses. So we can see here, the code is 1000. So we're going to remember that number. We're going to use that as part of the attack. Now, the basics of Hashcat is you're going to specify a file that contains all the hashes that you've got from somewhere, from as a red teamer, from breaking into something, into a website, into a domain controller, as examples. We're then going to specify the dictionary that we're going to use. Now, the dictionary is basically just a notepad text file that contains one word on every single line, which is what the tool is going to go through and compare the hashes with. Now, the quality of that dictionary is very, very important. So we're just going to use a custom dictionary in this, but there are really, really big ones out there. So rocku.txt is the kind of famous one that's used, but there are a lot better ones out there than that. Lots of ones you can use that contain pretty much every English word, Spanish, French, Italian, all the main languages, plus names, places, all that sort of stuff. And then variations of those, every password that's ever appeared in a data breach. So a huge, huge list. And then we can run it through rules, which I'll come to in a bit to expand that list out even further. And how quickly your computer is able to crack those passwords is dependent on how powerful the graphics card is. Basically, that's the part that's going to do all the mathematical calculations to work out the hashes. So let's start off with a simple example. So inside a file, I have put two NTLM hashes to make it just nice and quick for the video. The first one should be really easy to crack just with the defaults that Hashcat has in place. The second one is going to be a little bit more difficult, and we're going to use some rules to do that. So the first thing we just typed out is Hashcat to launch the tool. Now we're going to specify the type of hash, which is -m1000, which we took from that bit I showed you earlier. So we type that in. Okay, so now we need to specify the file that contains the hashes. So again, this is just a notepad text file with one word in every single line. So I've rather creatively called it hashes.hash. Okay, so that's the hash file. So that's what it's going to look at to work out what the hashes are. Now we need to specify a dictionary file. So I've just called mine custom. So we've got custom.dict. And that contains all the words that I'm going to guess. So now I've got everything I need to do a very basic version of Hashcat that will get some passwords. If you tried this against a big database of passwords, this will get a large chunk of them, to be honest, because most people use very predictable passwords. So if I just press enter on that, that's going to start the tool running. And as I mentioned, this uses the graphics card. So it pulls in the kind of power from that. And that's very quickly hacked or cracked one of the passwords. And we can see it here. We've got the hash. And then afterwards, after the colon, we've got the plain text one. So I picked a nice easy password for this one, football, one of the most common passwords used by people. And that gives us the plain text password. So now if you had that and you had the username, you could just log in as that person straight away because you've got their plain text password. But that's a very simple example because in reality, most people on a network wouldn't be allowed to choose a password quite as weak as that. The password policy is probably asking for numbers and things like that as well. And we can see from that it's only got one of the two password hashes. So it hasn't cracked the second one using just this method. But this is where Hashcat can be really, really powerful. And there's lots of stuff in here I'm not going to have time to cover in the video. But what I am going to cover is an example of how to use rules to crack a password. Now, rules are, it's like a separate language that you can use, but luckily Hashcat has a load of really good ones built into it under the rules directory. And what rules are is applying different things to a password. So, for example, most people wouldn't use football all lowercase. They'd probably more likely have a capital letter, and that tends to go at the start. And they might have a number or maybe a special character at the end. So the different rules will go through and add things to it. So it might swap out to start with just the capital letter, then it might put a capital letter and a number and so on and so forth. It can swap out E's for 3's, 4's for A's, all that sort of stuff. It's very powerful what you can do with it. You can pretty much put in any swaps that you want. So if you've got a good dictionary combined with a good rule set, then you're in luck because it's going to work really, really well. So I'm just going to press the up arrow, which is going to bring back what I put in before within command prompt. So now I want to use the rules because I really want to get hold of the second password. So I'm going to specify an attack mode by doing -A, and the attack mode is 0, which allows us to use these custom rules. I'm then going to put in the -R flag, which allows us to use a rules file. This is rather than having a single rule where I just swapped out the first letter, for example, I'm going to have a file that contains a number of different rules. And again, it's just a notepad text file, but on every line, you've got a different set of rules. And there's a whole different language that would take me hours to go into on how this is done. But you don't need to know it, to be honest, because you can just use the ones built into Hashcat, or you can download a large rule file. And I've downloaded one called One Rule to Rule Them All, which I love the name of, which is inside the rules directory. So I'm going to do rules / and then one rule to rule them all .rule. Okay, so that is the name of the rule, very, very long rule file that contains all the different things that I'm going to run through. So now combining these things together, I've got the -M1000, which specifies its NTLM. I've got the hashes.hash, which is the hash file, which is something that you would have to supply to the toolers that you'd got from your red team exercise. The custom.dict. Now, there are ones built into Hashcat, but generally you're going to want to go and get hold of one off the internet. Just Google Hashcat password dictionaries. There's plenty of good ones out there. RockU's very, very good. And then -A0, which is the attack mode. And then I'm specifying the rule set within there as well. Now I'm going to hit enter, and that's going to start running through that much larger dictionary. Now that's going to take longer. So you can see on the bottom now we've got a list of options. So we can click on status, which will show us how far through the cracking process it is. We can pause it, we can bypass certain ones it's working on, and we can quit if we want to. Now, this is much more applicable when you're running password cracks against very large databases or very large dictionaries. You might find it takes hours. So when I do pen tests on internal networks, and if I get hold of a very large company's SAM file and I'm running complex rules against it, it might want to run for hours and hours on end, and your graphics cards making loads of noise, the laptop's getting really, really hot. But the more graphics cards you have, if you can daisy chain graphics cards together, you can get a really, really powerful password cracking rig. So if I just click on status, you can see what it's doing at the moment. And now you can see, look, do you see that pop up on the screen there in between? So if I kind of put it with the mouse, we can see there we've got the hash, but now it's cracked it. So it's a more complicated version of the first password. We've swapped out the O's for zeros and we put an exclamation mark at the end. But the rule set that I've used has now cracked that password and got the plain text. So we can see how by using rules, we get an ability to crack passwords that we couldn't previously crack with just the standard one. And you can really play around with this and use all sorts of different things, different rule sets and stuff to try different potential ways that people might have constructed their passwords. So now we've got 2 out of 2 passwords cracked. And these are stored in a file called hashcat.pot. It's a pot file. And the pot file contains a list of cracked passwords. So it'll show it like this with the hash, colon, and then the password. So when you're perhaps cracking a huge set of passwords, you can take this and put it into an Excel spreadsheet, for example, and use a colon as a separator, and then you can get the different columns with username and password in there. So that's a really quick run through the password cracking capabilities of Hashcat. There's lots more to dive into, but to be honest, in the vast majority of pen tests and red team scenarios I've done, this is what I've done. I've done a basic crack to start with, and then I've used the one rule to rule them all rule set to go through and crack loads more passwords. There are a number of different rule sets built into Hashcat that expand out slightly on some of the areas of the rule set that I talked about, and that will allow you to crack a few more, but by then you're getting down to just the odd password you might manage to crack if you're trying to crack thousands. So I hope that was useful. Have a play around. It's a really, really powerful tool. It's fun to use. There's some example hashes on Hashcat's website, or you can simply make your own hashes if you want to play around with it. So just go to a tool that can create NTLM hashes and type in your plain text and it will generate it and you can test it. Or if you manage to get hold of some hashes in a red team, then even better, you can try it in real life. Thanks for listening.